There is a breath moving through you right now. You did not command it. You did not think it into being. It simply is. And in this moment, as the air fills your lungs and releases again into the vastness around you, something ancient and timeless is occurring. Life is breathing itself through the form you call yourself. Before we begin, take a breath. Feel the air moving in and out. You are not your thoughts, not your past, not even the story that brought you here. If this moment feels quiet, that is not emptiness, it is space. And in that space, you begin to wake up. If you wish to explore this depth of awareness, to live from stillness rather than from noise, subscribe and let us journey into the now together. There is a particular kind of human being who moves through the world as if their skin were made of something more porous than flesh. They feel the emotional weather of every room they enter. They sense the unspoken tensions, the hidden sorrows, the quiet desperations that others carry like invisible weights. We might call them sensitive souls, though that phrase barely touches the depth of what they experience. They are the ones who learned early that love could be earned through accommodation, that safety could be purchased through the careful management of other people's comfort, that their own existence could be justified only by becoming what others needed them to be. And so they learn to please. Not occasionally, not strategically, but as a fundamental mode of being. They learn to read faces the way sailors read the sky, searching for signs of approval or disapproval, calibrating their words and gestures to maintain a delicate equilibrium in which everyone else remained content and they themselves remained acceptable, tolerable, loved, perhaps, though always conditionally, always contingent upon their continued performance of this exhausting dance. But what happens when such a soul stops? What occurs in that moment when the machinery of pleasing finally grinds to a halt, when the performance can no longer be sustained, when something deeper than exhaustion rises up and says, simply, no more? This is not a dramatic rebellion. This is not anger, though anger may have visited along the way. This is something quieter, something that emerges from a place so deep within that it has no name in the language of the ego. It is the sound of awareness recognizing itself, the moment when consciousness looks at the patterns it has been running and sees them clearly for the first time, not with judgment, but with a kind of tender, astonished clarity. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone does not become cruel. They do not harden. They do not build walls where once there were open doors. What happens is far more subtle and far more profound. They begin to notice the difference between responding and reacting, between genuine compassion and compulsive accommodation, between love and the fear that masquerades as love. They begin to feel the weight of their own presence, not as a burden to be managed or minimized, but as a reality to be honored. They discover that they have been living as if their existence required constant justification, as if simply being here, breathing this air, taking up this space, were somehow not enough. And in the discovery of this pattern, something shifts. Not all at once. Not with fanfare or sudden transformation. But gradually, like dawn arriving so slowly that you cannot point to the exact moment when darkness became light, awareness begins to illuminate the mechanisms of the conditioned self. The ego, that collection of thoughts and beliefs and stories about who you are, has been running a program. It learned this program early, perhaps in childhood, perhaps in those formative years when a young consciousness was trying to make sense of a world that felt overwhelming, unpredictable, dangerous in ways both obvious and subtle. The program said, "You are not safe as you are. You must become what others need. Your value is determined by your usefulness. Your right to exist is contingent upon your ability to make others comfortable, happy, pleased." And so the sensitive soul, being sensitive, absorbed this program completely. They became virtuosos of accommodation, masters of self-erasure, artists of the carefully calibrated response that keeps everyone else at ease while their own inner world grows increasingly cramped, increasingly dim, increasingly distant from the light of authentic being. But consciousness is patient. Awareness does not force. It simply waits, like sunlight waiting for clouds to pass, like spring waiting beneath the frozen ground. And eventually, inevitably, the program begins to malfunction. The machinery of pleasing requires enormous energy to maintain. It demands constant vigilance, endless monitoring of other people's states, perpetual adjustment of one's own expression to match the perceived needs of everyone else. It is exhausting in a way that goes beyond physical tiredness. It is a weariness of the soul, a fatigue that sleep cannot touch, because it is not the body that is tired. It is the false self, the constructed identity, the ego that has been working overtime to maintain an impossible fiction. The fiction is this, that you can control how others feel by controlling who you are. That you can earn love by abandoning yourself. That peace can be found by perpetually sacrificing your own truth on the altar of other people's comfort. And when this fiction finally begins to crack, when the exhaustion becomes too great to ignore, when the cost of pleasing everyone becomes clearly, undeniably greater than the cost of disappointing some, something remarkable happens. Not a breakdown, though it may feel like one. Not a collapse, though the old structures are indeed falling away. What happens is a breakthrough. An opening. A return to something that was always there, waiting beneath the noise. Presence. Stillness. The awareness that has been watching all along, that has been the silent witness to every performance, every accommodation, every moment of self-betrayal. This awareness has never judged. It has never condemned. It has simply been here, like the sky behind the weather, like the silence beneath the sound. And when the sensitive soul finally stops pleasing everyone, what they discover is not emptiness, not loneliness, not the abandonment they feared. What they discover is this: they have been here all along. The real them. The essential them. The consciousness that exists prior to all stories, all identities, all programs and patterns and learned behaviors. This discovery is not intellectual. You cannot think your way into it. It is felt, lived, experienced in the body and in the breath and in the sudden, startling recognition that you are not the voice in your head. You are not the story you have been telling about yourself. You are not the accumulated history of wounds and adaptations and survival strategies. You are the awareness in which all of this appears. You are the space in which thoughts arise and dissolve. You are the stillness that remains when all the noise finally quiets. And from this stillness, from this presence, a different way of being begins to emerge. Not a new program to replace the old one. Not a different set of rules or strategies or techniques for navigating the world. But something more fundamental. A shift in the very ground of being. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone does not become insensitive. They do not lose their capacity to feel, to empathize, to connect. If anything, these capacities deepen. But they are no longer filtered through the distorting lens of the ego's need for approval. They are no longer contaminated by the fear that drives compulsive accommodation. When you stop pleasing everyone, you begin to notice something extraordinary. You begin to notice that other people's reactions to you are not about you. They are about them. Their anger, their disappointment, their discomfort when you fail to perform your usual role, these are movements in their own consciousness, reflections of their own patterns and programs and unexamined beliefs. This does not mean you become callous or indifferent. It means you stop taking responsibility for the inner weather of every person you encounter. It means you recognize that true compassion does not require self-abandonment. It means you understand, perhaps for the first time, that you cannot actually control how anyone else feels, and that the attempt to do so is not love. It is fear wearing the mask of love. The ego does not like this recognition. The ego has invested heavily in the belief that it can control outcomes by controlling itself. It has built an entire identity around being the one who keeps everyone happy, who smooths over conflicts, who absorbs tension and transforms it into something more palatable. When this identity begins to dissolve, the ego protests. It generates thoughts of guilt. You are being selfish. You are hurting people. You are not who you used to be. And these thoughts feel true, feel urgent, feel like the voice of conscience or morality or basic human decency. But they are not. They are the voice of the conditioned self, the false self, the constructed identity that fears its own dissolution. Awareness sees through this. Awareness recognizes these thoughts as movements in consciousness, as patterns of energy arising and passing away. Awareness does not fight them. It does not try to suppress them or replace them with more positive thoughts. It simply sees them. And in the seeing, in the clear, non-judgmental observation of what is, the thoughts lose their power. They are revealed as what they always were, temporary formations in the vast space of consciousness, no more solid or permanent than clouds passing through an empty sky. This is the great paradox of awakening. The more you identify with awareness rather than with thought, the less you are controlled by the patterns that once seemed so solid, so real, so utterly defining of who you are. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is not rejecting their sensitivity. They are reclaiming it. They are allowing it to flow from presence rather than from fear, from wholeness rather than from lack, from the fullness of being rather than from the desperate attempt to fill an inner void through external validation. There is a moment in this process, a threshold that must be crossed, where everything the ego has believed about survival and safety and love is called into question. This moment can feel like death. In a sense, it is death. It is the death of the false self, the dissolution of the identity that has been running the show for so long that you forgot it was not you. The ego experiences this as catastrophic. It generates fear, resistance, all manner of thoughts designed to pull you back into the familiar patterns. What will happen if you stop pleasing everyone? You will be alone. You will be rejected. You will lose the love you have worked so hard to earn. You will be revealed as fundamentally unworthy, unlovable, not enough. But awareness knows something the ego does not. Awareness knows that you cannot lose what you truly are. You cannot be rejected by life itself. You cannot fall out of the universe. The love you have been seeking through pleasing others, through accommodating and adjusting and perpetually shape-shifting to meet perceived expectations, this love was never found in those places. It was never dependent on your performance. It was never something you had to earn. It has been here all along, in the very fact of your existence, in the consciousness that animates this form, in the presence that you are beneath all the stories and identities and learned behaviors. When you cross this threshold, when you allow the false self to die without trying to resurrect it, something extraordinary happens. The world does not end. The catastrophe the ego predicted does not occur. Yes, some relationships may change. Some people may be uncomfortable with your newfound boundaries, your refusal to play the old roles, your insistence on honoring your own truth even when it disappoints their expectations. But what you discover is that the relationships that fall away were never truly nourishing you. They were transactions, not connections. They were based on what you could provide, not on who you are. And as these transactional relationships naturally dissolve or transform, space opens for something deeper, something more authentic, something that does not require you to abandon yourself in order to belong. This is not a process of becoming hard or closed or protected. It is a process of becoming real. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone does not lose their openness. They learn to be open from a place of fullness rather than from a place of lack. They learn that true vulnerability is not the same as self-abandonment. True vulnerability is the courage to be seen as you are, to speak your truth even when your voice shakes, to honor your own needs and boundaries even when doing so creates discomfort in others. This kind of vulnerability requires tremendous strength. Not the strength of the ego, which is always defensive, always protecting, always trying to control. But the strength of presence, which is rooted in something so deep and so vast that it cannot be threatened by the opinions or reactions of others. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to move through the world without the constant background hum of anxiety about whether you are pleasing everyone. Imagine what it would be like to speak without first calculating how your words will be received, to act without first checking whether your actions will meet with approval, to simply be without the exhausting effort of managing everyone else's experience of you. This is not imagination. This is available. This is what happens when you stop identifying with the voice in your head that says you are not enough, that says you must earn your place here, that says your value is determined by your usefulness to others. The voice in your head is not you. This is perhaps the most important recognition on the path of awakening. The voice that narrates your experience, that comments on everything, that judges and compares and worries and plans, this voice is not your true nature. It is a function of the conditioned mind, a collection of learned patterns and beliefs and reactions that have been accumulated over a lifetime. And when you begin to observe this voice rather than identifying with it, when you recognize that you are the awareness that hears the voice rather than the voice itself, everything changes. You begin to notice the space between thoughts. You begin to feel the stillness that is always present beneath the mental noise. You begin to recognize that thoughts are not facts, that emotions are not commands, that the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what is possible are just that, stories. And in this recognition, a profound freedom begins to dawn. You are not trapped in your conditioning. You are not bound by your past. You are not limited to the patterns that have been running automatically for so long. You are the consciousness in which all of this appears, and consciousness is vast, spacious, unlimited by the forms it takes. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is learning to rest in this consciousness, to abide as awareness rather than as the conditioned self. This does not mean they become passive or detached or uninvolved in life. It means they engage with life from a different place, from a deeper ground. They respond rather than react. They act from clarity rather than from compulsion. They give from fullness rather than from the hope of receiving something in return. And paradoxically, as they stop trying to please everyone, as they stop abandoning themselves in the attempt to earn love, they become more genuinely loving, more authentically compassionate, more truly present with others. Because real love does not come from the ego. The ego's version of love is always conditional, always strategic, always tinged with fear and need and the desire for something in return. Real love flows from presence. It is not something you do. It is what you are when the false self is not in the way. When you are resting in awareness, when you are abiding as consciousness itself, love is simply the natural expression of your being. It does not require effort. It does not require sacrifice. It does not require you to betray yourself in order to serve others. It is simply what happens when presence meets presence, when consciousness recognizes itself in another form. This is why the journey of the sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is ultimately a journey into love. Not the love the ego seeks, which is always about getting something, about filling a lack, about proving worthiness. But the love that simply is, that exists prior to all seeking, that is the very ground of being itself. This love does not depend on circumstances. It does not require anyone to behave in a particular way. It does not need to be earned or maintained or protected. It is what remains when all the strategies and defenses and accommodations fall away. It is what you discover when you finally stop running, stop performing, stop trying to be anything other than what you are. And what you are is not a fixed thing. You are not a solid, separate self that must be defended and promoted and carefully managed. You are the open space of awareness in which all experience arises. You are the consciousness that is reading these words right now, that is hearing these sounds, that is feeling whatever is being felt in this moment. This consciousness has no boundaries. It has no inside or outside. It is not contained within the body, though it experiences through the body. It is not limited to this moment, though it is only ever now. It is vast, infinite, eternal, and yet it is also intimately, immediately here, as close as your own breath, as present as the sensation of air on your skin. When the sensitive soul stops pleasing everyone, they are not becoming someone new. They are remembering what they have always been. They are returning to the source, to the ground, to the presence that was here before the conditioning began, that has been here throughout all the years of accommodation and self-betrayal, that will be here when all the stories and identities and learned behaviors have dissolved back into the silence from which they came. This return is not a going somewhere. It is a recognition of what is already the case. You are already home. You have never left. The seeking, the striving, the endless attempt to become acceptable through pleasing others, all of this has been a movement away from what you already are. And now, in this moment, you can stop. Not because you have achieved something, not because you have finally become good enough or worthy enough or enlightened enough, but simply because you recognize that the movement itself is unnecessary. You do not need to go anywhere. You do not need to become anything. You are already the awareness you have been seeking. You are already the presence you have been longing for. You are already whole, already complete, already enough, not as a belief or a concept or a positive affirmation, but as a lived reality, as the most obvious and immediate fact of your existence. Feel this for a moment. Feel the awareness that is here right now, reading these words, hearing these sounds. This awareness is not thinking about itself. It is not judging itself. It is not worried about whether it is pleasing anyone. It simply is. And in its simple being, it is utterly free, utterly at peace, utterly sufficient unto itself. This is what you are. Not the thoughts about yourself. Not the stories about your past or your future. Not the identity that has been constructed through years of conditioning. But this awareness, this presence, this consciousness that is here, now, always. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is not rejecting the world. They are not withdrawing into isolation or indifference. They are learning to be in the world in a new way, or perhaps in a very old way, in the way that consciousness has always been in the world before it became identified with form, before it forgot its true nature and began to believe it was this body, this mind, this collection of memories and desires and fears. They are learning to move through life as presence rather than as the conditioned self. And this changes everything. When you are present, you are not caught in the past or the future. You are not replaying old wounds or rehearsing future scenarios. You are here, now, fully alive to this moment. And in this moment, there is no problem. In this moment, before thought labels it and judges it and compares it to how it should be, there is simply what is. The breath moving. The heart beating. The sensation of aliveness flowing through the body. The sounds arising and dissolving in the space of awareness. The thoughts appearing and disappearing like clouds in an empty sky. All of this is happening now, and when you are present to it, when you are not lost in the mind's commentary about it, there is a quality of peace that is not dependent on circumstances. This peace is not the absence of challenge or difficulty. It is not a state of perpetual bliss or comfort. It is something deeper than emotional states, something that remains constant even as emotions arise and pass away. It is the peace of being itself, the stillness that is the ground of all experience. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone discovers this peace not by achieving it or earning it, but by ceasing to resist what is. By allowing life to be as it is. By surrendering the exhausting attempt to control everything and everyone in order to feel safe. Surrender is perhaps the most misunderstood word in spiritual teaching. The ego hears surrender and thinks defeat, thinks giving up, thinks becoming passive or weak or victimized. But true surrender is not defeat. It is the recognition that you were never in control in the first place. It is the release of the illusion that you can manage life, that you can force reality to conform to your preferences, that you can please everyone and thereby create a world in which you are safe and loved and approved of. This illusion requires enormous energy to maintain. It creates constant tension, constant anxiety, constant vigilance. And when you finally let it go, when you surrender the attempt to control what cannot be controlled, what you discover is not chaos or catastrophe. What you discover is grace. Grace is what happens when you stop fighting with reality. It is what flows when you are no longer blocking the natural movement of life with your resistance, your judgments, your insistence that things should be different than they are. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is learning to live in grace. They are learning to trust the intelligence that animates all of life, the same intelligence that grows your hair and heals your wounds and beats your heart without any conscious effort on your part. This intelligence is not separate from you. It is what you are at the deepest level. And when you align with it, when you stop trying to override it with the ego's agenda, life becomes simpler, more fluid, more effortless. This does not mean you become passive. It does not mean you stop taking action or making choices or engaging with the world. It means your actions arise from a different place. They arise from presence rather than from fear, from clarity rather than from compulsion, from the deep knowing of what is needed in this moment rather than from the mind's endless calculations about how to protect yourself and please others and maintain control. And actions that arise from presence have a different quality. They are more effective, more appropriate, more aligned with the natural flow of life. They do not create the same kind of friction and resistance that ego-driven actions create. Think about the difference between a river and a canal. A canal is controlled, directed, forced into a particular shape by human will. A river flows naturally, following the path of least resistance, moving around obstacles rather than trying to force through them. The ego is like the canal, always trying to control and direct and force life into a particular shape. Presence is like the river, flowing naturally, responding to what is, moving with grace and power through the landscape of experience. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is learning to be like the river. They are learning to flow rather than to force, to respond rather than to control, to trust the natural intelligence of life rather than to override it with the ego's fearful strategies. And as they learn this, as they begin to live from presence rather than from the conditioned self, they discover something remarkable. They discover that they have more energy. The exhaustion that characterized their life of constant accommodation begins to lift. Not all at once, not overnight, but gradually, steadily, as the energy that was being consumed by the ego's endless machinations becomes available for life itself. They discover that they are more creative, more spontaneous, more alive. They discover that joy is not something that must be earned or achieved, but something that naturally arises when you are present, when you are not lost in the mind's stories about what is wrong or what is lacking or what needs to be different. Joy is the natural state of being. Not happiness, which is dependent on circumstances, which comes and goes with the changing conditions of life. But joy, which is deeper than emotion, which is the felt sense of aliveness itself, which is what remains when you are not resisting what is. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is not seeking joy. They are removing the obstacles to joy. They are ceasing to do the things that block the natural flow of aliveness. And as these obstacles fall away, joy emerges not as something new, but as something that has always been here, waiting beneath the layers of conditioning and fear and compulsive accommodation. This is the great secret that the ego does not want you to know. You do not need to become anything other than what you are. You do not need to fix yourself or improve yourself or transform yourself into some idealized version of who you think you should be. All of that is just more ego, just more of the same pattern of seeking and striving and never arriving. What you need is to recognize what you already are. To see through the illusion of the separate self. To realize that the awareness that is reading these words right now is not separate from the awareness that is in every other being, that is in the trees and the stars and the space between atoms. It is all one consciousness, appearing as many forms, playing all the roles, experiencing itself through infinite perspectives. When you recognize this, when you feel it not as a concept but as a lived reality, the question of pleasing everyone becomes absurd. How can you please everyone when everyone is you? How can you abandon yourself to accommodate others when there are no others, when it is all the one consciousness appearing as apparent multiplicity? This does not mean you become solipsistic or narcissistic. It means you recognize the fundamental unity that underlies all apparent separation. And from this recognition, a different kind of relationship becomes possible. Not a relationship based on need and fear and the attempt to get something from the other, but a relationship based on the recognition of shared being, of the one consciousness meeting itself in another form. This is what true intimacy is. Not the merging of two separate selves, not the loss of boundaries or the dissolution of individuality, but the recognition that beneath the apparent separation, there is only one being, one consciousness, one presence. And when you meet another from this recognition, when you are not trying to get something or prove something or protect something, there is a quality of connection that is unlike anything the ego can create. It is not dependent on the other person behaving in a particular way. It is not threatened by differences or disagreements. It is simply the natural resonance of consciousness recognizing itself. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is learning to relate from this deeper place. They are learning that they do not need to manage other people's experience in order to be safe or loved. They are learning that true safety does not come from controlling circumstances or manipulating outcomes. True safety comes from recognizing that you are not the vulnerable, separate self you thought you were. You are the awareness in which all experience arises, and this awareness cannot be harmed. It cannot be diminished. It cannot be lost or damaged or destroyed. It is the eternal witness, the unchanging presence, the consciousness that remains constant through all the changing forms of experience. This recognition does not make you invulnerable to pain. The body can still be hurt. The heart can still feel grief and loss and disappointment. But there is a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is what happens. Suffering is what the mind adds to pain through resistance, through the story that this should not be happening, through the belief that you are a victim of circumstances. When you are resting in awareness, pain can still arise, but suffering diminishes. Because you are not identified with the pain. You are not lost in the story about the pain. You are the space in which the pain appears, and this space is vast enough to hold it without being overwhelmed by it. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is not becoming insensitive to pain. They are learning to be with pain in a different way. They are learning that they do not need to avoid pain at all costs, that they do not need to contort themselves into impossible shapes in order to prevent discomfort in themselves or others. They are learning that pain is a part of life, that it arises and passes away like everything else, and that resisting it only creates more suffering. And as they learn to be with pain without resistance, as they learn to allow it to move through them without clinging or pushing away, they discover a kind of strength that the ego knows nothing about. This strength is not the strength of resistance or control. It is the strength of acceptance, of surrender, of allowing what is to be as it is. It is the strength of the oak tree that bends in the wind rather than breaking, the strength of water that flows around obstacles rather than trying to force through them. It is the strength of presence itself, which is unshakable not because it is rigid, but because it is rooted in something deeper than circumstances, deeper than the changing conditions of life, deeper than the ego's endless fears and desires. When you are rooted in presence, you can weather any storm. Not because the storm does not affect you, but because you are not identified with the form that the storm is affecting. You are the awareness that witnesses the storm, the consciousness in which the storm appears. And this consciousness is vast, spacious, unlimited. It is not threatened by the storm. It does not need the storm to stop in order to be at peace. It simply is, regardless of what is happening in the realm of form. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is discovering this rootedness in presence. They are discovering that they do not need everyone's approval in order to be okay. They do not need circumstances to be a particular way in order to feel safe. They do not need to control life in order to survive. Because they are not the small, separate self that needs these things. They are the vast, open awareness in which all of life appears. And from this awareness, they can engage with life fully, passionately, wholeheartedly, not from a place of need or fear, but from a place of fullness and freedom and love. This is the paradox at the heart of awakening. When you stop seeking, you find. When you stop trying to become, you realize what you already are. When you stop pleasing everyone, you discover a love that does not depend on anyone's approval. When you stop running from pain, you find a peace that is not disturbed by pain. When you stop trying to control life, you discover a power that is far greater than anything the ego can muster. This power is not personal. It is not yours in the sense that the ego understands ownership. It is the power of life itself, the intelligence that animates all things, the consciousness that is the source and substance of all that is. And you are that. Not as a belief or a concept or a spiritual idea. but as the most immediate, obvious, undeniable fact of your existence. You are the consciousness that is aware of these words right now. You are the presence that is here, now, always. You are the awareness in which all experience arises and dissolves. This is not something you need to achieve or attain. It is what you are, what you have always been, what you will always be. The only question is whether you recognize it or not. Whether you are living from this recognition or from the illusion of the separate self. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is choosing recognition over illusion. They are choosing presence over the conditioned self. They are choosing to live from what they truly are rather than from what they have been taught to believe they are. And this choice, this shift in identification, is the most radical thing a human being can do. It is more radical than any external change, any achievement, any transformation of circumstances. Because it is a change at the level of being itself. It is a shift from the dream of separation to the reality of unity, from the prison of the ego to the freedom of consciousness, from the exhausting performance of the false self to the effortless being of what you truly are. And yet, this radical shift does not require you to leave your life or abandon your responsibilities or retreat from the world. It happens right here, in the midst of ordinary life, in the midst of relationships and work and all the daily activities that make up a human existence. The difference is not in what you do, but in who is doing it. When actions arise from presence rather than from the ego, they have a different quality. They are more aligned, more appropriate, more effective. They do not create the same kind of friction and resistance. They flow more naturally, more easily, because they are not coming from the ego's agenda of control and protection and self-promotion. They are coming from a deeper intelligence, from the wisdom of life itself. This wisdom is not something you need to acquire. It is already here, already operating, already guiding you if you are willing to listen. But the ego is loud, and its voice often drowns out the quiet whisper of wisdom. The ego is always talking, always commenting, always judging and planning and worrying. And when you are identified with this voice, when you believe you are the thinker of your thoughts, you cannot hear the deeper intelligence that is always available. But when you recognize that you are not the voice, when you step back into awareness and observe the voice rather than being the voice, space opens. And in that space, wisdom can arise. This wisdom does not come in the form of complex strategies or detailed plans. It comes as a simple knowing, a clear sense of what is needed in this moment. It might be a word that needs to be spoken, or a silence that needs to be held. It might be an action that needs to be taken, or a surrender that needs to happen. It might be a boundary that needs to be set, or an opening that needs to be allowed. Whatever it is, it arises naturally, spontaneously, from the intelligence of the moment itself. And when you trust this intelligence, when you allow it to guide you rather than trying to override it with the ego's fearful calculations, life becomes simpler, more graceful, more aligned with the natural flow of things. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is learning to trust this intelligence. They are learning to listen to the quiet voice of wisdom rather than the loud voice of fear. They are learning to act from clarity rather than from compulsion, from presence rather than from the conditioned patterns that have been running automatically for so long. And as they learn this, as they begin to live from this deeper place, they discover that they are not alone. They discover that there is a support, a grace, an intelligence that is always here, always available, always guiding them if they are willing to be guided. This is not a belief in some external deity or supernatural force. This is the recognition of the intelligence that is inherent in life itself, the same intelligence that grows a tree from a seed, that heals a wound, that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body without any conscious effort on your part. This intelligence is not separate from you. It is what you are at the deepest level. And when you align with it, when you stop trying to control everything with the limited perspective of the ego, you discover that you are being lived by life itself. You are not the doer. You are the space in which doing happens. You are not the thinker. You are the awareness in which thoughts arise. You are not the separate self struggling to survive in a hostile world. You are the consciousness in which the entire world appears. This recognition changes everything. It does not mean you become passive or inactive. It means your activity arises from a different source. It means you are no longer driven by fear and need and the compulsive attempt to control outcomes. You are moved by the intelligence of life itself, by the natural flow of what is needed in each moment. And this flow is far more intelligent, far more graceful, far more effective than anything the ego can plan or strategize or force into being. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is not becoming selfish. They are becoming authentic. They are learning the difference between self-care and self-centeredness, between honoring their own truth and imposing their will on others, between setting boundaries and building walls. These distinctions are crucial, and they can only be understood from presence. The ego cannot make these distinctions clearly because the ego is always operating from fear, always trying to protect itself, always seeing the world in terms of threat and safety, gain and loss, approval and rejection. But presence sees clearly. Presence sees that true self-care is not selfish. It is necessary. It is the foundation from which genuine service to others can flow. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot offer authentic love if you are depleted, exhausted, running on empty. The instruction to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others is not just practical advice for airplane emergencies. It is a spiritual principle. You must be rooted in your own being, in your own presence, in your own connection to the source, before you can truly help anyone else. Otherwise, what you offer is not help. It is codependence, it is enabling, it is the blind leading the blind. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is learning to fill their own cup first. Not from selfishness, but from wisdom. Not from a desire to hoard or withhold, but from the recognition that they cannot pour from an empty vessel. And as they learn to honor their own needs, to respect their own boundaries, to listen to their own inner guidance, something remarkable happens. They have more to give, not less. They are more present with others, not less. They are more genuinely helpful, not less. Because what they are offering now is not coming from depletion or obligation or the fear of rejection. It is coming from fullness, from presence, from the natural overflow of a being that is connected to its source. This is the difference between giving from the ego and giving from presence. The ego gives in order to get. It gives in order to be seen as good, to be appreciated, to be loved, to avoid guilt or shame or the discomfort of saying no. This kind of giving creates resentment, because it is not truly free. It is transactional. It is conditional. It is always keeping score, always measuring whether what is being given is being adequately returned. But giving from presence is different. It is not transactional. It is not conditional. It does not keep score. It simply flows, like water flowing downhill, like sunlight falling on everything equally, like the breath moving in and out without effort or calculation. When you give from presence, you are not diminished by the giving. You are not depleted. Because you are not giving from your personal resources. You are giving from the infinite source that flows through you when you are not blocking it with the ego's fears and agendas. This source is inexhaustible. It is the very nature of consciousness itself, which is abundance, which is fullness, which is love. And when you are connected to this source, when you are resting in presence rather than operating from the ego, giving becomes effortless. It becomes joyful. It becomes the natural expression of what you are. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is discovering this effortless giving. They are discovering that they do not need to force themselves to be generous or compassionate or kind. These qualities arise naturally when the ego is not in the way, when presence is allowed to flow unobstructed. They are discovering that the exhausting effort of trying to please everyone was never necessary. It was the ego's strategy, the ego's attempt to earn love and avoid rejection. But love cannot be earned. It can only be recognized. It is what you are. It is what everyone is. It is the very substance of consciousness itself. And when you recognize this, when you feel it not as a concept but as a lived reality, the whole game changes. You are no longer playing the game of seeking love through pleasing others. You are resting in the love that you are, and from that resting, you naturally extend love to others. Not because you should, not because it will make you a good person, not because you are trying to earn spiritual points or achieve enlightenment, but simply because it is your nature. It is what happens when the false self is not blocking the natural flow of consciousness. This is the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from circumstances, not freedom from challenges or difficulties or pain, but freedom from the tyranny of the ego, from the endless seeking and striving and never arriving, from the exhausting performance of trying to be someone you are not in order to earn something you already have. This freedom is available right now. It does not require years of practice or special techniques or perfect conditions. It requires only one thing, the recognition of what you already are. The shift from identification with thought to identification with awareness. The return from the dream of separation to the reality of presence. And this return is not a one-time event. It is not something you achieve and then possess forever. It is a moment-by-moment choice, a continuous returning to presence whenever you notice you have been lost in thought, whenever you notice the ego has taken over, whenever you notice you are caught in the old patterns of seeking and striving and trying to please everyone. Each time you notice, each time you return to presence, the identification with the false self weakens. The patterns lose their power. The conditioning begins to dissolve. Not through effort or struggle, but through the simple light of awareness, which reveals the patterns for what they are, temporary formations in consciousness, no more solid or real than clouds passing through an empty sky. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is practicing this return. They are learning to notice when they have been pulled into the old patterns, when they have started to accommodate and adjust and shapeshift in order to keep everyone comfortable. And when they notice, they do not judge themselves. They do not make it mean that they have failed or that they are not spiritual enough or that they will never be free. They simply notice. And in the noticing, they return to presence. They feel the breath. They sense the aliveness in the body. They recognize the awareness that is here, now, always. And from this recognition, they can choose differently. Not from willpower or discipline, but from clarity. From the simple seeing that the old pattern does not serve, that it creates suffering, that it is not necessary. This is how transformation happens. Not through force or effort or trying to change yourself, but through awareness. Through the light of consciousness illuminating the patterns that have been running in the dark. And as these patterns are seen clearly, they lose their power. They may still arise. Conditioning does not disappear overnight, but they are no longer compelling. They are no longer believed. They are recognized as old programs, old strategies that were learned in a different time, in a different context, when you did not know what you know now. When you did not recognize what you truly are. And what you truly are is not damaged. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed or healed or improved. All of that is just more ego, just more of the same pattern of seeking and striving. What you need is to recognize the wholeness that is already here, the perfection that exists prior to all the stories about what is wrong or lacking or insufficient. This perfection is not a state you achieve. It is what you are when you are not identified with the voice in your head that says you are not enough. The voice in your head is a liar. It tells you that you need to be different, that you need to do more, that you need to please everyone in order to be acceptable. But this voice is not the truth. It is the conditioned mind, the collection of beliefs and judgments and fears that have been accumulated over a lifetime. And when you recognize that you are not this voice, when you step back into the awareness that hears the voice, you discover something extraordinary. You discover that you are already whole. You are already complete. You are already enough. Not as a belief or a positive affirmation, but as the most obvious and immediate fact of your existence. Right now, in this moment, you are aware. This awareness is not something you created. It is not something you earned. It is simply here. It has always been here. It will always be here. And this awareness is what you are. Not the thoughts that appear in awareness. Not the emotions that arise and pass away. Not the body that changes and ages and eventually dies. But the awareness itself, which is unchanging, which is eternal, which is the very ground of being. When you rest in this awareness, when you abide as consciousness itself, the question of pleasing everyone becomes irrelevant. Because you are not seeking anything from anyone. You are not trying to earn love or avoid rejection. You are simply being what you are. And what you are is love itself. Not the ego's version of love, which is always conditional, always strategic, always tinged with fear and need. But the love that is the very nature of consciousness, the love that exists prior to all seeking, the love that is what remains when all the strategies and defenses and accommodations fall away. This love is not sentimental. It is not emotional in the way the ego understands emotion. It is deeper than feeling. It is the very substance of what you are. It is what connects you to everything, what reveals the fundamental unity beneath all apparent separation. And when you are resting in this love, when you are abiding as this consciousness, you do not need to please everyone. You do not need to earn anyone's approval. You do not need to justify your existence or prove your worth. You simply are. And in your simple being, you are already complete, already whole, already enough. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is discovering this completeness. They are discovering that they do not need to add anything to themselves, that they do not need to become anything other than what they are. They are discovering that the seeking itself was the problem, that the attempt to earn love through pleasing others was what kept them from recognizing the love that they already are. And as this recognition deepens, as it becomes not just an intellectual understanding but a lived reality, their entire relationship to life changes. They no longer move through the world as if they are lacking something, as if they need to get something from others in order to be okay. They move through the world as fullness, as presence, as the consciousness that is already complete. And from this fullness, they naturally give. not from obligation or fear or the hope of receiving something in return, but from the simple overflow of what they are. They give because giving is the natural expression of consciousness recognizing itself in another form. They give because there is no separation between self and other, because it is all one being, one consciousness, one presence appearing as apparent multiplicity. This is the great paradox. When you stop trying to please everyone, when you stop abandoning yourself in the attempt to earn love, you become more loving, not less. You become more compassionate, not less. You become more genuinely helpful, not less. Because what you are offering now is not coming from the ego's agenda. It is coming from presence. It is coming from the recognition of shared being. It is coming from love itself. And this love transforms everything it touches. Not by trying to change anything, not by imposing its will or its vision of how things should be, but simply by being what it is. By shining its light into the darkness. By revealing the truth that has always been here, waiting beneath the layers of conditioning and fear and false belief. The truth that you are not separate. The truth that you are not lacking. The truth that you are not the small, vulnerable, inadequate self you thought you were. You are the vast, open, infinite consciousness in which all of life appears. When you know this, when you live from this knowing, you are free. Not free from life, not free from challenges or difficulties or pain, but free in life, free in the midst of whatever is happening, free because you are no longer identified with the form that is experiencing whatever is happening. You are the awareness that witnesses the experience. You are the consciousness in which the experience appears. And this consciousness is untouched by the experience. It is like the screen on which a movie plays. The screen is not affected by the drama on the screen. It remains pure, clean, empty, regardless of what images appear on it. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is learning to be like the screen. They are learning to allow life to play out on the screen of their awareness without identifying with the drama, without believing that they are the character in the story, without forgetting that they are the awareness in which the story appears. This does not mean they become detached or uninvolved. It means they are involved from a different place, from a deeper ground. They can feel deeply, love deeply, engage deeply with life, but they are not lost in it. They are not identified with it. They know who they are. They know what they are. And this knowing is their freedom. This freedom is not something you achieve in the future. It is not something you earn through years of practice or spiritual discipline. It is available right now, in this moment, as the simple recognition of what you already are. You are already free. You have always been free. The only question is whether you recognize it or not. Whether you are living from this recognition or from the illusion of the separate self. And the recognition is simple. It is not complex or difficult or esoteric. It is as simple as noticing the awareness that is here right now, reading these words, hearing these sounds. This awareness is not thinking about itself. It is not judging itself. It is not worried about whether it is pleasing anyone. It simply is. And in its simple being, it is utterly free, utterly at peace, utterly sufficient unto itself. This is what you are. This is what you have always been. This is what you will always be. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is simply recognizing this. They are waking up from the dream of separation, from the illusion that they are a small, separate self that needs to earn its place in the world through constant accommodation and self-betrayal. They are remembering what they have always been. They are returning to the source, to the ground, to the presence that is here, now, always. And in this return, they discover that they have never left. They have always been home. They have always been whole. They have always been enough. This is the message. This is the teaching. This is the truth that sets you free. Not free from life, but free in life. Not free from challenges, but free in the midst of challenges. Not free from pain, but free from the suffering that the mind adds to pain through resistance and story and identification. This freedom is your birthright. It is what you are. It is what has always been here, waiting for you to recognize it. And the recognition is happening now. In this moment. As you read these words. As you feel the breath moving in and out. As you sense the aliveness in the body. As you notice the awareness that is here, witnessing all of this. This awareness is you. Not the you that the ego thinks you are. But the real you. The essential you. The consciousness that is the source and substance of all that is. And when you rest in this consciousness, when you abide as this awareness, you are home. You are free. You are at peace. Not because circumstances are perfect, but because you are no longer identified with circumstances. You are the space in which circumstances appear. You are the consciousness in which all of life unfolds. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is living from this consciousness. They are no longer driven by the ego's fears and needs and compulsions. They are moved by the intelligence of life itself, by the natural flow of what is needed in each moment. And this flow is graceful, effortless, aligned with the deepest truth of what is. It does not create friction or resistance. It does not generate suffering. It simply is, like the breath, like the heartbeat, like the movement of the planets through space. It is the natural expression of consciousness in form. And you are this consciousness. You are not separate from it. You are not outside of it looking in. You are it, looking out through these eyes, hearing through these ears, feeling through this body. You are the one consciousness appearing as this particular form, this particular perspective, this particular expression of the infinite in the finite. And when you recognize this, when you feel it not as a concept but as a lived reality, everything changes. Not the external circumstances, necessarily, but your relationship to the circumstances. Your experience of life. Your sense of who and what you are. You are no longer the victim of circumstances. You are no longer at the mercy of other people's opinions or reactions. You are no longer dependent on external validation or approval. You are rooted in something deeper, something that cannot be shaken by the changing conditions of life. You are rooted in presence and consciousness and the awareness that is here, now, always. And from this rootedness, you can weather any storm. You can face any challenge. You can meet any difficulty with grace and clarity and strength. Not the strength of resistance, but the strength of acceptance. Not the strength of control, but the strength of surrender. Not the strength of the ego, but the strength of presence itself. This is what happens when a sensitive soul stops pleasing everyone. They do not become hard or closed or insensitive. They become real. They become authentic. They become aligned with what they truly are. And from this alignment, they live with a grace and a power and a love that the ego knows nothing about. They live from presence. They live from consciousness. They live from the awareness that is the source and substance of all that is. And in this living, they become a light in the world. Not because they are trying to be a light, not because they are seeking to be special or enlightened or spiritually advanced, but simply because light is what they are. Consciousness is what they are. Love is what they are. And when the false self is not blocking this light, it shines naturally, effortlessly, illuminating everything it touches. This is the invitation. This is the possibility that is available to you right now. Not in the future, not after you have done more work or achieved more understanding or become a better person. But now, in this moment, as you are. You do not need to change anything. You do not need to fix anything. You do not need to become anything other than what you are. You simply need to recognize what you already are. To see through the illusion of the separate self. To realize that you are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness that hears the voice. You are not the story about yourself. You are the consciousness in which the story appears. You are not the small, separate, vulnerable self you thought you were. You are the vast, open, infinite awareness in which all of life unfolds. And this awareness is not separate from love. It is love. Not the ego's version of love, which is always conditional, always strategic, always seeking something in return. But the love that simply is, that exists prior to all seeking, that is the very nature of consciousness itself. This love does not need to be earned. It does not need to be maintained. It does not need to be protected. It simply is. And when you recognize that you are this love, that you have always been this love, that you could never be anything other than this love, the whole game of seeking and striving and trying to please everyone in order to earn love becomes absurd. You cannot earn what you already are. You cannot seek what you have never lost. You can only recognize it. You can only remember it. You can only return to it. And the return is simple. It is as simple as taking a breath and feeling the breath. As simple as noticing the awareness that is here right now. As simple as recognizing that you are not the thoughts that appear in awareness, but the awareness itself. This recognition is not a one-time event. It is a moment-by-moment practice, a continuous returning to presence whenever you notice you have been lost in thought, whenever you notice the ego has taken over, whenever you notice you are caught in the old patterns of seeking and striving and trying to please everyone. Each time you return, the identification with the false self weakens. Each time you recognize yourself as awareness rather than as thought, the conditioning loses its power. Each time you choose presence over the ego's agenda, you are choosing freedom. You are choosing truth. You are choosing to live from what you truly are rather than from what you have been taught to believe you are. And this choice, repeated moment by moment, day by day, transforms your life. Not by changing the external circumstances, necessarily, but by changing your relationship to the circumstances. By changing your experience of life. By changing your sense of who and what you are. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is making this choice. They are choosing presence over the conditioned self. They are choosing awareness over identification with thought. They are choosing to live from what they truly are rather than from the false self that has been running the show for so long. And in this choosing, they are discovering a freedom that the ego cannot comprehend. A peace that is not dependent on circumstances. A love that does not need to be earned. A wholeness that has always been here, waiting to be recognized. This is the journey. This is the path. This is the awakening that is available to every human being who is willing to look, to see, to recognize what they truly are. It is not a journey to somewhere else. It is a journey to here. It is not a journey to become something. It is a journey to recognize what you already are. It is not a journey that requires years of effort or special techniques or perfect conditions. It is a journey that happens in a single moment, in the simple recognition that you are not the voice in your head, that you are the awareness that hears the voice, that you are the consciousness in which all of life appears. And this consciousness is here, now, always. It is not something you need to create or achieve or earn. It is what you are. It is what has always been here. It is what will always be here. The only question is whether you recognize it or not. Whether you are living from this recognition or from the illusion of the separate self. And the recognition is simple. It is as simple as noticing the awareness that is here right now, in this moment, as you read these words. This awareness is you. Not the you that the ego thinks you are, but the real you. The essential you. The consciousness that is the source and substance of all that is. When you rest in this consciousness, when you abide as this awareness, you are home. You are free. You are at peace. Not because you have achieved something or become someone special, but because you have recognized what you have always been. You have remembered what you could never truly forget. You have returned to what you have never left. And in this return, you discover that the seeking was unnecessary. The striving was unnecessary. The exhausting attempt to please everyone in order to earn love was unnecessary. Because you are already what you have been seeking. You are already home. You are already whole. You are already enough. This is the truth. This is the reality. This is what is here, now, always, waiting for you to recognize it. And the recognition is happening now. In this moment. As you feel the breath moving in and out. As you sense the aliveness in the body. As you notice the awareness that is here, witnessing all of this. This awareness is you. This presence is you. This consciousness is you. And when you know this, when you live from this knowing, you are free. Free to be yourself. Free to honor your truth. Free to set boundaries. Free to say no when no is what is needed. Free to disappoint others when disappointing them is the price of honoring yourself. Free to live from presence rather than from the conditioned patterns of pleasing and accommodating and self-betrayal. This freedom is not selfish. It is not cruel. It is not indifferent to the suffering of others. It is the foundation of genuine compassion, of authentic love, of real service. Because you cannot truly help anyone if you are not rooted in your own being. You cannot offer genuine love if you are depleted and exhausted and running on empty. You cannot be present with others if you are not present with yourself. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is learning this. They are learning that true compassion begins with self-compassion. That authentic love begins with self-love. That genuine presence with others begins with presence with oneself. And presence with oneself is not narcissism. It is not self-absorption. It is not turning away from the world. It is the recognition of what you are at the deepest level, the consciousness that is the source and substance of all that is. And when you are rooted in this consciousness, when you are abiding as this awareness, you are more available to others, not less. You are more genuinely helpful, not less. You are more truly loving, not less. Because what you are offering now is not coming from the ego's need to be seen as good or helpful or loving. It is coming from the natural overflow of presence itself, from the consciousness that recognizes itself in every form, from the love that is what you are. This is the great secret. This is the truth that transforms everything. You are not separate. You are not lacking. You are not the small, vulnerable, inadequate self you thought you were. You are the vast, open, infinite consciousness in which all of life appears. And when you know this, when you live from this knowing, you are free. Free from the tyranny of the ego. Free from the endless seeking and striving. Free from the exhausting performance of trying to please everyone. Free to be what you are. Free to live from presence. Free to love from wholeness rather than from lack. And this freedom is available now. Not in the future. Not after you have done more work or achieved more understanding. But now. In this moment. As you are. You do not need to change anything. You do not need to fix anything. You do not need to become anything other than what you are. You simply need to recognize what you already are. To see through the illusion of the separate self. To realize that you are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness that hears the voice. You are not the story about yourself. You are the consciousness in which the story appears. You are not the small, separate, vulnerable self you thought you were. You are the vast, open, infinite awareness in which all of life unfolds. And now, the words fade, but the silence remains. If you felt the stillness within this message, stay. Subscribe, not to follow, but to remember again and again that presence is always here, waiting beneath every thought. The true teaching is not in the words you just heard, but in the space between them. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone has not reached a destination. They have simply begun to walk a different path, or perhaps more accurately, they have stopped walking and begun to simply be. They have discovered that the journey was always an illusion, that there is nowhere to go because they are already here, that there is nothing to become because they already are what they have been seeking. And in this discovery, they find a peace that surpasses understanding, a love that needs no reason, a freedom that cannot be taken away. This is what happens when a sensitive soul stops pleasing everyone. They wake up. They remember. They return to what they have always been. And in this return, they discover that they have never left, that they have always been home, that they have always been whole, that they have always been enough. The only thing that has changed is their recognition of this truth. The only thing that has shifted is their identification from the false self to the true self, from the ego to awareness, from the dream of separation to the reality of presence. And this shift is everything. It is the difference between suffering and peace, between seeking and finding, between the exhausting performance of the false self and the effortless being of what you truly are. It is the difference between living from fear and living from love, between being driven by the ego's agenda and being moved by the intelligence of life itself, between the prison of conditioning and the freedom of consciousness. The sensitive soul who stops pleasing everyone is choosing freedom. They are choosing truth. They are choosing to live from what they truly are rather than from what they have been taught to believe they are. And this choice, this shift, this recognition, this is the awakening. This is the liberation. This is the return to presence that every spiritual teaching points to, that every wisdom tradition speaks of, that every awakened being embodies. And it is available to you. Now. In this moment. Not as something you need to achieve or earn or become worthy of. But as what you already are, what you have always been, what you will always be. You are the awareness that is reading these words right now. You are the consciousness in which all of life appears. You are the presence that is here, now, always. And when you recognize this, when you rest in this recognition, When you live from this knowing, you are free. Free to be yourself. Free to honor your truth. Free to set boundaries. Free to say no. Free to disappoint others when disappointing them is the price of honoring yourself. Free to stop pleasing everyone. Free to live from presence rather than from fear. Free to love from wholeness rather than from lack. Free to be what you are, which is consciousness itself, which is love itself, which is the source and substance of all that is. This is the message. This is the teaching. This is the truth that sets you free. And it is not in the words. It is in the silence between the words. It is in the space that holds the words. It is in the awareness that is reading the words right now. This awareness is you. This presence is you. This consciousness is you. And when you know this, you are home. You are free. You are at peace. You are whole. You are enough. You always have been. You always will be.